Welcome back, Sebastian here. So now it's time for my power rankings following the 2024 Bahrain Grand Prix. So of course I did this all last year, thought it went pretty well, so I'm continuing it again. So this year, starting in number 20, now it's a bit strange to say this about a driver who had a very good qualifying, one of the best drivers in qualifying, but unfortunately a race that didn't have a whole lot going on, one of the worst drivers I felt in the race, and that is Nico Hülkenberg. So for Hülkenberg, he outqualified Magnussen, of course, but Magnussen beat him in the race. He of course was the one driver primarily responsible for the contact between himself and Lance Stroll at the opening corner on the opening lap. He of course had to come in pit for a new front wing, and his race was effectively over from there. Now, I think if he had not had that, he may have had an outside shot of getting some points today. That being said, of course, I think because he hit Stroll, and Stroll was the driver who ended up finishing in 10th, it's hard to say. I think Stroll would have had a really good shot of getting that 10th place, even without, obviously, since he finished there anyway. But yeah, I think he would have been there. He would have been close, 11th to 12th, without that contact, and maybe a chance at points. But yeah, I felt unfortunate for Hülkenberg. He's 20th. Now, for number 19. I'm going to put Logan Sargent, out-qualified and beaten by his teammate. Qualifying, I think, a bit disappointing. Looked very close to Albon, but then unfortunately his last run in Q1 didn't really go to plan, and he ended up getting knocked out. Otherwise, I think he could have made Q2. The race is a bit harder to say. He had some good battles early on in the first stint, including with Daniel Ricciardo, but then he had some kind of issue, what looked like some kind of technical issue with his steering wheel. Albon had some issues too as well, and it forced him and it basically led to him locking up and kind of getting stuck down in the runoff area at turn 4. Had to come in and pit for a new steering wheel, and his race was basically done from there. So while on paper it looks like he had a terrible race, most of those problems were not his fault. Number 18, I'm going to go with Pierre Gasly. Really hard to say anything positive about the weekend as a whole for Alpine, and for Gasly, he was out-qualified and out-raced by his teammate Ocon, so for him, definitely a weekend to forget, and with Alpine being basically an absolute disaster at this point, yeah, it's kind of hard to put Gasly any higher. Number 17, I'm going to go with Valtteri Bottas. So for Bottas, qualified okay, did out-qualify Zhou, but still got knocked out in Q1. And then in the race, I don't think it was really any positives from the race at all. Yeah, of course, it seems like he made contact with Hülkenberg at turn 1, which may have contributed to that whole mess there at the first corner. And then, of course, his race was basically pretty much over from there because he kind of got caught up there and then dropped it to the back. And then his race was ruined by his 53-second pit stop, which, of course, would have given him PTSD from Monaco 2021. From Secure 2020, all the other failed pit stops that he's had in his career. So yeah, pretty much and again a write-off for Bottas. Now number 16, I'm going to go with Daniel Ricciardo. He was out-qualified by Tsunoda, but out-raced Tsunoda technically because he did finish ahead of him. But of course there was those team orders that we've all heard about, where basically the team asked Tsunoda to let Ricciardo by in the closing laps of the race. I don't think Ricciardo had a great race. I think obviously he got out-qualified, and then in the race it seemed like the first stint went pretty poorly. Was racing with Sargent, was quite a few places behind Tsunoda, who looked like he might have a shot of getting a point or two. But then I think as the race went along, he did get a bit better as the race progressed, and by the end he was quite quick. Maybe perhaps about a little bit quicker than Tsunoda, but of course I'm not sure he would have been able to actually overtake Tsunoda on track without those team orders. Now, number 15, Kevin Magnussen, a guy who I think had a pretty decent race, got out-qualified by Hülkenberg, but did out-race him. I thought, quietly, of course, no points, but a pretty good result for him. I think in 12th place, which I think for Haas they'll be pretty happy, given that last year their massive Achilles heel was tire degradation. The fact that Magnussen was able to finish 12th in a race where everyone finished, and they were actually able to race and they weren't just falling through the field, I think would be massive progress for them. And for Magnussen, I think another disappointing qualifying, which continues a trend from last year, and that's something he definitely needs to work on. But the race, I think, was pretty decent from him. Number 14, I'm going to go with Esteban Ocon. Out-qualified and outraced his teammate, which, given how bad the Alpine was performing this weekend, is really the best he could have done. I don't know if I could have really justified putting him much higher because he didn't really do a whole lot on other than that. And yeah, it's just they're basically stuck racing these cars at the bottom, basically. And so it's there's not really a whole lot to add other than that. All right, number 13, a guy who's going to be in the headlines a lot today is Yuki Tsunoda. So my power rankings are not going to include what happened after the race. It's only going to focus on the qualifying and the race itself. But in qualifying, he out-qualified Ricciardo, which is good, almost made it to Q3. The race I thought was pretty good. Looked like at stages he might get a point, but unfortunately wasn't to be. I think the second stop, like basically the timing of the second pit stop, I think was a bit too late. I guess maybe perhaps the pace wasn't there. We obviously saw the radio meltdown at the end, where he was basically screaming on the radio that he couldn't believe that he was being asked to move out of the way. And I can understand his frustration. They're not really racing for points. You're in the closing stages of the race. You're not really, there was no way that Ricciardo was going to get any points anyway, so there's not much point. I kind of understand Tsunoda's viewpoint on it. At the same time, I think what he did after the race, where he basically just went and tried to dive bombed Ricciardo at turn 8, I think on the cool down lap. It looked like it came pretty close to contact, which I think would have made things even worse. But yeah, I don't think it was really great, and yeah, he locked up doing it. So I think the team debrief would have been very interesting. Of course, Ricciardo had some choice words afterwards in the post-race interview with Will Buxton, including immature. So yeah, I'm sure that debrief went very, very well. But yeah, for Tsunoda, for qualifying in the race, I thought it was all right. Now, 12. I'm going to go with Oscar Piastri, out-qualified and out-raced by his teammate Norris. Kind of a repeat of last year, but I do think, on pace, given that there was no safety cars or anything, he didn't finish too far behind Norris. But again, I think, you can tell that Norris is still quite a bit more comfortable in the races with tire management than Piastri is. He also made that small mistake trying to basically cover Hamilton coming out of the pits. Of course, he was on hard tires, so it was really easy to make that mistake, but still, of course, lost that position there. Number 11, I'm going to go with Alex Albon, out-qualified and out-raced his teammate Logan Sargent. Was having issues with his car. I think the car was too hot. It said on his dash, and he was having other issues as well. Of course, that the new steering wheel were Williams after basically a decade, being the only team that didn't have the screen inside the steering wheel. They finally implemented that, so that was good. But of course, it seems to be having issues. For Albon, I think of course no points. Maybe a bit disappointed with his final finishing position, but that being said, I think he did the most that he could have done today. Now, number 10, I'm going to go with Lewis Hamilton, out-qualified and out-raced by his teammate George Russell. I know after qualifying that was pretty disappointing. He qualified in 9th. He and as well as Toto Wolff were talking about how great they were going to be in the race and how they'd set the car up for the race and how they were going to be pushing forward. And unfortunately, that didn't really materialize. He finished, what place did he finish? He finished in 7th. So I guess he did make up places from his starting position, but I think he definitely would have been hoping for a podium or maybe a 4th place. So yeah, I think a bit disappointing for Hamilton. Of course, there'll be a very interesting dynamic between himself and Russell in the team this year, given that he's going to Ferrari at the end of the year. So yeah, I've decided Hamilton in 10th. Now, in 9th, I've got Lance Stroll. So for Stroll, 10th place finish. It was out-qualified and out-raced by his teammate Fernando Alonso, which normally would not really merit a place inside the top 10. But the reality is he was not basically spun around at the first corner by Hülkenberg, and I honestly thought he'd probably finish 16, 17, somewhere around there, because that seemed to happen a lot last year. But no, he actually had a really strong recovery drive. The first stint was really impressive. Made his way up to 11th after his first pit stop because he pit so early, and I think he mentioned in his interview that being in clean air really helped him just push, and he didn't really have to worry about being compromised by the pace of the cars around him. So really good result from him, getting a point. I know he finished 20 seconds off Alonso, but given the circumstances, I thought it was a pretty decent race from Stroll. Now, number 8, I'm going to go with Charles Leclerc. He out-qualified his teammate Sainz, but of course was out-raced. For Leclerc, the first half of the race was pretty much an unmitigated disaster, and of course that was pretty much entirely due to the car. So I'm not blaming Leclerc for this, but I think it's kind of hard to justify putting him higher, given he started second but then dropped down to at one point fifth, but got back to fourth at the end of the race. So a really tough race for Leclerc. I don't think he would definitely not be happy with how that went, especially with the brake issues that they were having throughout pretty much the entire first half of the race. And that's something that they're definitely going to want to get on top of going forward into next weekend's race, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Now, number 7, I'm going to go with Fernando Alonso. So I think decent race today. I know he dropped positions compared to where he started, but I think that was always going to happen. I think he even admitted afterwards that they really kind of outperformed what their car was capable of doing yesterday, and that they kind of knew that they were going to fall backwards because they knew they didn't have the pace to keep up with the McLaren, to keep up with the Mercedes. So really, ninth place was the best they were going to do today, and that's exactly what Alonso did. All right, number 6. I'm going to go with Zhou Guangyu. Very, very close to points, finishing in 11th. And after getting knocked out in Q1, I think a really good drive from Zhou. I was actually very surprised he was able to get himself in that position, and it was honestly until the final pit stops, he looked like he was on for a point there. But yeah, very, very surprised that the pace was so good. Of course, it's pretty much impossible to compare it to his teammate Bottas, given that how the horror show that was Bottas's race. And we don't really have, of course, this is the first race, so we don't know enough about their car to know if this is something that's going to be a trend where they qualify poorly and then have decent races, or if this is just a one-off and Zhou just had a really excellent race. So unfortunately, that's the beauty of the first race, but I thought it was a pretty good race, so I put him in 6. All right, number 5, I'm going to go with Lando Norris. Out-qualified and out-raced his teammate Piastri. Thought had a pretty good race. I think he left a little bit of time on the table in qualifying, but reality is, I think he really got the best he could have done today in the Grand Prix. Maybe he could have been ahead of Russell if he had a better qualifying session, but at the end of the day, I think they were too similar on pace in the race that he was never going to overtake him. And yeah, I think the podium was never really on the cards today, so pretty good job for Norris. All right, number 4, I'm going to go with Sergio Perez. I know, yes, he was out-qualified and out-raced by his teammate Max Verstappen, but that being said, today was Perez's best race in a long, long time. I know he qualified 5th, but given how close the field seems to be in qualifying this year, that's honestly not too bad. And in the race, he did exactly what he needs to be doing. He was really solid, moved his way up to 2nd place, got a 1-2 for the team, and got those valuable points in the Constructors' Championship. I know the gap between himself and Sainz was 3 seconds, which was much closer than the gap between Perez and Alonso last year. So of course the starting point I think is going to be much closer, and Perez will need to be on his A game almost every weekend if he wants to be on the podium, because I do think if he has an off weekend, makes mistakes, the Ferraris and maybe the McLarens, maybe the Mercedes will be there to get those podiums and get those points. So really good start to the season with Perez, but he's going to need to be consistent and keep this up going forward for the rest of the season. Number 3, George Russell, out-qualified and out-raced his teammate. Really excellent job from him. I know he didn't get the podium. I think he maybe deserved to get a podium, but I think the Ferraris were too fast today, and it seems like the Mercedes were dealing with a lot of cooling and car issues, something that all of the Mercedes-powered cars were dealing with. I think not a whole lot more to say. I know he got up to 2nd place at one point, so I think he'll be a bit disappointed not to get the podium. But that being said, I do think he overall had a very good weekend this time out. All right, number 2, I'm going to go with Carlos Sainz. Finished, of course, 3rd, the only non-Red Bull driver on the podium. He was out-qualified by Leclerc, but did out-race Leclerc. So I thought a really excellent drive from Sainz, really calm, calculated. The overtakes that he made were really, really precise, really well executed, very clean. And that's exactly what he needs to be doing if he wants to market himself as being arguably the best driver available. I think, between him and Alonso at this point in their careers, it's pretty close. But yeah, Sainz is trying to make himself a driver that everyone wants to sign for 2025. Now, first place, I don't think this is really a question. I debated writing his name on the board before I even started. But yes, it is Max Verstappen. Out-qualified and outraced his teammate Sergio Perez. Got a Grand Chelem in the first race of the season, won by 22 seconds. Not a whole lot more to add. Basically, the perfect race, the perfect start to a season. Hasn't dropped a single point yet. We'll see how this year goes. Of course, he's on a eight consecutive race winning streak. So he's basically one off Vettel's old mark that he broke last year, and he's two off his current mark. So we'll see in the coming races if he's able to challenge that. Of course, I think next weekend will be a bit tricky given that Saudi Arabia, it's a race that he obviously didn't win last year. One of the three that he didn't win last year. But yeah, I think, absolutely masterclass weekend from Verstappen. Didn't put a single foot wrong. And was flawless. So there's my power rankings for the 2024 Bahrain Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, I'll be out with my preview for Saudi Arabia on Wednesday, I believe. And if there's enough news, I guess talking points from around the motorsports world, I may do some kind of news video on Tuesday as well. So thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.